Welcome to Trina Talk. This is the podcast where guests share their stories of pursuing their passions, living a fulfilled life, and empowering others. Each week, I talk with inspiring leaders, business owners, and people with amazing stories from around the world in unscripted conversations as they share their successes and failures. This podcast is all about empowering you to keep striving in your personal and professional life. I am your host, Trina L. Martin. Hey, welcome to another episode. If you're listening, go ahead and go out and subscribe so that you won't miss any future episodes. Also, if you like the show, give us a 5-star review. That way we can move up in the rankings and other people can find the show and be impacted and inspired just like you. Are you a woman of color in tech who feels stuck because you don't see people who look like you lack support from someone who truly understands your journey, and you want to overcome obstacles that you're facing in the tech industry? If you want to elevate your pay, become a leader at your company, be noticed by colleagues and executives to advance in your career, then Tech Trifecta is for you. It's my private coaching program and is now open. I'm only accepting a limited number of people to the program, so apply today at tlmintl.link/Tech Trifecta. Hey, welcome to episode 190. The topic of this week's episode is From Dismal Workplace to Desired. My guest this week is Dana Vogelmeier. Dana began Vogelmeier Consulting to help companies create a workplace where people love to work and will feel fulfilled at the end of the day. Her 33 years of corporate work experience included more than 25 years of leading diverse teams and working for a multitude of leaders. Over the years, she began to examine the differences in the teams she worked in and led. Some were great teams that ran like magic, and other teams seemed to struggle to find harmony. Dana decided to pursue researching what makes this happen, and in 2016, she opened her own company to help others create a place people cannot imagine leaving. She worked with technology firms, school districts, banks, insurance companies, and others. Hi, Dana. Welcome to Trina Talk.
Hi, Trina. Thank you for having me. I'm happy to be here.
I'm glad that you're here with me because you are an expert in a area that is really one of my passions. Workplace, making sure it's bearable for people, leadership, things like that. But before we dive in, how I always like to start the show is I ask my guests to tell the listeners who you are and what made you the Dana that you are today.
Okay, well, thank you. That's a fun question. So, Dana Vogelmeier, I have been an independent consultant for a little more than 3 years now. And I came into working as an independent consultant, focusing on workplace culture and creating workplaces where people love to work. That's kind of my thing, because everyone goes to work. I shouldn't say everyone. Most people go to work every day and they feel either, excited or looking forward to who they're going to sit with or whatever, maybe looking forward to something during the day. But there are also a lot of people who go to work each day and just dread it, like the morning drive, or even if you're not commuting now and you're working at home, but just dread it. Like, oh. So I really try to focus on what's going on in that workplace where people dread going to work. If they love it, good. We work 40 or 50 years, sometimes longer in our lifetimes. And I feel like we shouldn't wake up every day dreading it. We should look forward to it and feel fulfilled at the end of the day and feel valued. And like we're making a contribution in some way and not drained, So I really want to focus on those kinds of workplaces and help those leaders figure out, like, what are one or two things maybe that we could tweak and change that would really make a change for people. And I came into this after working in the corporate world for over 30 years. I worked for a large Fortune 50 company, And the majority of my experiences, I worked in 14 different departments, and the majority of my experiences were really good. And I had good leadership, but I had 2 times in those 33 years where I really struggled and dreaded going to work. And I kept thinking, like, what is going on here? But when the second one happened and I had already had the first experience, I knew so much more. And I had done some research about employee engagement and high performing workplaces and also toxic workplaces. So I knew what was happening, and I could kind of manage myself a little bit better and what I was doing to contribute or to make it better. But the first time I experienced it, it was just like hitting a brick wall, and I struggled and I was drained and I gained weight and I was depressed and I just didn't even look like myself anymore. I just couldn't get excited about my work, and I didn't feel like I had meaning in my work, and I was struggling. So when I finally kind of came out on the other side and got into a new role again in a new department, I loved my boss and my colleagues and my teams. And, then again, I felt like, okay, now I'm contributing again. So having those emotional ups and downs of my own is what really made me want to help other companies make a great workplace for their employees.
I love that, because just like you said, I've had jobs where I dreaded going into work every day. It's, and it's really sad, because the majority of people do go to work because they want to do a good job. They want to be happy. And I mean, people, let's just face it, nobody's got a job going to work because, that's just something they just love to do. We have to pay bills. We have to make, a living, right? And it's just so unfortunate when you hate going to your job. And 9 times out of 10, people who feel that way, the environment and their bosses are making it that way, but either they don't realize it or they're doing it intentionally. So what are you seeing in your work? I saw you laugh.
I did. Well, and you and I, are not alone. And I mean, we've had similar experiences. We're not alone in this. There's, high disengagement rates. And so I always kind of follow the Gallup organization, because they do wonderful research and polling on employee engagement. And it's always kind of hovering around 30% of the workforce is engaged. So I always think, okay, that means 70% is unengaged or highly disengaged. Kind of thinking about it as a spectrum. They might not hate it and they might be satisfied, but they're not highly engaged, where they're innovative and problem solvers and, high contributors. But then you also on that spectrum have people who are actively disengaged, who are sabotaging the company. They're horrible to the customers. They're horrible to their colleagues. They're, making problems. They're not coming to work. There's a lot of things that they're doing that are contributing negatively to the outcomes. And those are the people that we need to kind of figure out how to work out of the organization, which requires some performance management and all. But there are some people kind of in that middle that you can kind of bring over, and at least get them in a good spot where they're working with you. They might not be the top highest performers, but at least they're steady eddies and they're working with you, as opposed to sabotaging the outcomes. So, yeah.
So I'm interested in, like, the people who you say may be sabotaging. What have you found? Have you found that maybe these people started out as, satisfactory employees, but then something happened along the way to make them that way?
Exactly. Yes. And usually it's something that in their minds was unfair. It was a change and it wasn't properly addressed, or maybe they weren't selected for an opportunity. I had one person that I had worked with who was just such a, kind of a Debbie Downer, if you will. And his colleagues didn't really like him. And I could see it in team meetings, just the, kind of eye rolls and things like that. And I talked to him because I had come in as their leader. And so I talked to everybody on the team, and I talked to him and I asked him, hey, it kind of feels like maybe you don't really love it. Is that fair to say? And it kind of, like took him by surprise, but I think he knew he was coming off that way. I mean, certainly he knew he was unhappy. So he told me a story of something that had happened, Trina, 7 years earlier. Never got over it. And he was carrying that chip on his shoulder for 7 years. And I said, I can understand why you're upset about all of that. I get it, but we're not all always selected for every job that we apply for. So that part in and of itself, that happens. You're not going to get everybody you apply for. The other component of what was that making him so aggravated was that department would call him as the subject matter expert on projects. It was kind of cross-functional work. And they would ask him all these questions. He's like, but they'll call me and ask me how to do the work, but I wasn't good enough to be hired to come over there and work. So, you know what I mean? So it was one of those things that was never addressed, and it just sat with him.
Yeah.
Dude. So, I mean, that's an example, but I think a lot of times that what happens with these folks is it's some form of a miscommunication or perceived unfair treatment or a change they didn't like. It's something like that, but never got addressed. So it just carries with them for whatever reason.
And I was just wondering that when you were speaking and talking about the situation, I was like, I wonder if anybody ever addressed that with him. And sure enough, no. And when you go in and you're talking to like the leaders of the organization, do you happen to bring these things up to them so that, they know why? Because I don't think most people just say, oh, I got a job and I'm just going to be the disgruntled person. Something happens to get them to that point. And instead of just deeming somebody as a problem employee, look to see what's going on.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right. They're not trying to be it. They're not trying to be the problem.
Right.
I think sometimes, when people get so much angst inside, like they can't get out of their own way, but to your point, that's our responsibility as leaders is to work with the team and develop people and make things better than you found them. And if, in that situation where nobody had really worked with him, it was kind of like they just allowed it, and meanwhile, he's walking around with a chip on his shoulder. He's mean in the meetings to the other employees, and the other people suffer.
Right.
And that's not good. I mean, we want the team performing well, like operating high up, not everybody feeling like, oh, I hope so-and-so doesn't show up today. Which is how they felt, but there have been other situations too, where, for whatever reason, people are angry. And sometimes it doesn't have anything to do with work. It just could be things going on outside at home. But when you can talk to them about not trying to pry, but, how you're being perceived and how like maybe a communication that you said, maybe how other people took it. And so if somebody can just kind of hold that mirror up and show them, like, when you said this, here's what your coworkers heard. And then, it's that self-awareness that you really need somebody to care enough to help you see it.
Yeah.
That just doesn't always happen.
Yeah.
I had one leader that I worked with that in his particular organization, he was the highest person, but reported to a board. And he wasn't a CEO. It was a different kind of structure. But one of the things I shared with him, he had 2 employees who were majorly disgruntled and were just making others' life miserable, because all day they would kind of bark at each other. Just, this is wrong, that's wrong, this is wrong, that's wrong. And so everybody's listening to that all day. And it was kind of one of those deals where I hope so-and-so is not at work today. And I had come in to do some work to try to figure out what was going on in the environment. And when I shared with him kind of what was going on and the perceptions, and like, something needs to happen here. These 2 can't continue on like this. It's just disrupting everybody else. And that was one finding. But I also said, what was another interesting finding? Because I usually do like some discovery work and ask people questions, and I'll observe some meetings and things like that. And I said, one of the other things is they really want you to come around and say good morning or hello, or, just engage in a little bit of conversation. It doesn't have to be major, and nobody's asking you to take them to lunch, but they want to see you and they want you to acknowledge them. And he was very introverted. And in their setup, he could come in the back and go right to his office. So he didn't have to walk through the office. And I said, come in the front door instead in the mornings and just walk through and say, good morning, good morning, good morning. You don't have to say anything else. Like, it was kind of like baby stuff.
Right.
Like,
right.
Start there. You don't have to say anything else. Just, do that and then go on back. And in time, the more you do it, the more comfortable you'll get with it and everything. And he goes, I just don't understand why they want to see me. Like, why do they care? And I said, but they do. That's the thing. Don't try to dig into the psyches.
Right.
They do want to see you, and it will make a big difference. And you're visible. You appear then approachable and in it with them, as opposed to just he's back there and goes in and out that back door and we never see him.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
So different things just, make an impact on the culture, kind of how things are done here. Like, oh, our boss just comes in the back and we never see him.
Right.
No. We're all in this together. We're all on the same team trying to achieve our goals.
And, and that's funny because, several years ago, I had a CEO on the podcast. She was in Australia. And it was funny because, similar to what you're saying, she said, even though she would get to the office before the majority of the people got in, she said she knew 9:00 her people would be coming in. So she made it a point to stand at the door and just greet people as they came in. Like, oh, good morning. How are you doing? Oh, how did the baseball game go last night? Oh, how was the anniversary? She said, not that, she was trying to pry, but just to let people know that they mattered.
They matter. Yes. She cares.
Yeah. Yes. And, and it's funny because, and especially if it's sincere, and I always say this to people, it's not the fact that you do that, but to be sincere. And I know the listeners, they know, because I've given this example and told this story several times, but I had a second line supervisor, and he would come through and he would say, hey, Trina, how are you doing? How are your 2 boys? And I don't have 2 boys. And I told him this several times, and the first time, you think, okay, you correct. Oh, I don't have 2 boys. But then he did that repeatedly. And then finally I got to the point where I was like, you know what? He doesn't even care. So I'm going to stop correcting him, let him say or think whatever he wants to say, but he doesn't care. But what that told me was he really wasn't sincere and genuine by asking me how I was doing. Because he couldn't even get the fact that, and I don't expect you to know my children's name, but I do expect for you to say, well, how's your son and daughter? Or even if you don't even have to go that far, he could have just said, how are your children? And I would have been fine with that. Instead of saying, how are your 2 boys? And I don't have 2 boys. Yeah. So it's things like that people start to see, okay, I really don't care about this person. They're just making this up. How do you help companies see and address things like that?
Yeah. Oh, that's hard, because that is a lack of self-awareness too, of how they're coming across.
Yeah.
That, to use your word, that he wasn't genuine. He was just kind of passing by and kind of probably marking it off the list. Like, they talked 4 people today or whatever. Because I know that some people are really uncomfortable with it. They're more introverted. And I will say I started out that way, but it's just like anything else. The more you do it, the better you get at it. And you realize people are much more like you than you originally think. But to help leaders kind of understand, I always have some conversation starters, but I ask them, what do you do to build relationships, or how do you get to know people? And it could be in that case where he logged in. Trina has 2 boys and just had trouble getting it out. And maybe he heard you say it, maybe he didn't. He could be thinking about, oh, beside Trina is Sheila, and I've got to talk to her too.
Right.
But kind of talking to them about how they engage with people and what do they know about people. And if somebody had a problem, could they come, work related or not? Could they come to you? Would they come to you? Do they come to you? And if they say, I don't think anybody has come to me, why not? Why wouldn't people come to you? Because they're talking about whatever's going on And they could be just talking about it, at the metaphorically, water cooler, or their colleagues, right? Or another leader.
Mm-hmm.
They're talking about it somewhere, if, when they have problems or issues at work.
Right.
Why are they not coming to you? But it's that kind of drawing out through some self-awareness and some conversation and having them think about it. And one good thing that not a lot of people love to do this, but I do think journaling during, at the end of the day or at the beginning of the day, but sometime, associated with your work day, you can kind of think about, if you do it at the end of the day, you could think about, like, what did I do well today? Give yourself a pat on the back. And what do I have going on tomorrow that I need to think about? Maybe I have to have a hard conversation with so-and-so about their performance, or year-end reviews are coming up. Mm-hmm. And I've got a few difficult ones that I know they're expecting to get, a higher raise, and they're going to get a meeting expectations raise, mm-hmm. or maybe below, right? But those hard conversations, you can kind of think about it a little bit. And the more difficult conversations you have, and they come out either kind of not great, they'll get better over time. And then you can draw upon those experiences and get a few wins under your belt. And then you feel like, okay, now I can do this.
Right.
And getting better at it. But I feel like the right word here is intentional, just to be intentional about what those conversations are going to bring and plan for them. Mm-hmm. But, I think the hard thing is that if you are having, I'm going to say, if I'm that second line leader that you were talking about, and I'm not having a genuine impact, and no one ever tells me, I'm going to keep behaving that way because it appears to be working, right? Mm-hmm. But eventually, hopefully, my leader knows it somehow, or something happens where mm-hmm. I recognize it. One of the the very best favorite leader I ever had in my old organization, he became my favorite leader of all time because he gave me a very specific scenario right after a meeting where there were several of us in the room together, and I was kind of new as a leader and, really wanted to do a good job. And we were working in a kind of a startup department. The company wasn't a startup, it was a startup department. And there was just a lot going on, a lot of pressure and people working lots of hours and stuff. And, I was probably a little more just kind of driven to get things done, mm-hmm. where I should have been more collaborative, mm-hmm. slowed down and asked questions of others before I just had my team go do our thing. And I didn't know it. I didn't see it. But after a meeting, he had only been my boss for a very brief time. I had a different guy before, and he moved on to another role. And this guy came in and, did take some time to build some relationships. And he, it felt like he was very sincere and cared about all of us. I could see that. But after this meeting, he said, I want to talk to you for a minute. So we went to his office and he said, I want to ask you, first of all, how you thought that went when we were talking about X. And I was like, I think it was fine. And he said, here's what you said, and here's what they heard, and here's how it felt. And this isn't the first time this has happened, but this time I had an opportunity to experience it myself. So that told me, oh, people are talking about me. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. I'm getting a reputation for, not collaborating, mm-hmm. and just doing my own thing. And you can't work that way in the corporate world today. Right. So when he really took the time to share it with me, and I will say this, it stung. And
oh yeah,
it stung bad. And it was like, what? Yeah. Me? But after I thought about it, I was, he was right. Mm. And I thought, oh man, yeah, that's not how I want to come across. I want to do a better job than that. I need to back up a little bit. But I behaved that way because in my old world, I didn't work in the corporate setting. I worked out in the field, and I could do my own thing.
Right.
And so that had always worked for me. So I was continuing to do that until something happened. Yeah. So just like the guy that we were talking about before, like until something happens to make that change.
Yeah.
I think it's okay.
But, and that's good. Like you say, he was one of your best, bosses, leaders, because he did take that time. Now, right. on the flip, he could have been one of these bosses that would have just said, write you, on your review, oh, you don't collaborate with people, or, you have, a bad attitude. And it's not that people have a bad attitude, like you said, you have come from a world where you were used to working by yourself and not in a team environment. So, and I think it's very important, and I'm going to ask you how you go in, what exactly are you asking these companies when you go in? But I think a lot of times companies hire people for a position, what's on paper, but then they get them, and instead of looking and seeing what their strengths are and things like that, they'll say, oh, this person is a bad fit or bad for this job. Well, it may just be that they're misplaced. Yeah, they may have had the credentials to fulfill the paper requirements, but if you get there and you see that they're good at doing something else, or they're better put over here where you can get more out of them and they can be fulfilled, wouldn't that be a great thing to do?
Yeah. Yes. I could not agree more. But then I do think you're right. Like, they weren't maybe the best fit for that role, but they get labeled as a low performer or a bad attitude or whatever it might be. Or, I have to spend so much time working with so-and-so. And you already have them on board. Things were looking good at the beginning, which is why you selected them. And maybe you can put them in another position where they can perform really well. And it's a win for both.
Right.
There was a leader that I was friends with that had a person on his team, and he told me, she's a member of the Mom Club. And I said, what's that? And he said, Memo of the Month. Like, he was always just documenting her performance. And, I said, if she's getting that many documents for like not performing, why wouldn't you just let her go?
Right.
And he said, she tries, she's got a great attitude, so there was definitely that willingness. They're just, there were just things she couldn't do. And, but I mean, he kept working with her, and he didn't like gloss over anything and say, oh, you're fine. He's like, we need to do this way, or, maybe why don't I have you shadow so-and-so, and maybe you can watch how they do it, So he really did work with her, but like over all those months, he did have to dedicate a lot of time to her. But after, and she kind of turned it around and became a solid performer. She was never going to be the number one, but she became a good, solid performer. We love those people. Right? And she was so thankful to him for not giving up on her. So then she really wanted to do a great job for him. Yeah. And when he told me this story, this had already happened by the time he and I had worked together. But when he told me that story, it kind of logged in my mind, because I thought, I need to keep that in mind for people, help them be successful.
Yeah.
It's not going to work every single time, but it can work in a lot of situations.
And that's the magic word, help people be successful. Yeah. Not just say it or not just label people, but help them. And I think that's where a lot of people get lost. So when you're consulting with companies, and I'm just curious, when you take your poll of the employees, what are you finding that they say? Because I'm pretty sure there's some commonalities across the board. What are you finding that they're saying that they need to make their work life better?
They need more I'm going to call it relationship, if you will. So not just somebody who talks to them once a year for their review, or just in a team meeting, or, with the whole group, but like somebody who cares about what their situation is and what their work aspirations are, what's going on with them, even outside of work, not so that they can fix it, but just so that you care. And in some cases, do nothing more than empathize, and think about in these last almost 2 years now, with all the issues going on and people having to have kids do remote schooling while they do their jobs, while they might have somebody who's sick, or unemployed or whatever, just the stress of it all. I mean, we were stressed before the pandemic began.
Yeah.
And then add that on, this
Right.
huge, unprecedented, ambiguous thing that we don't know when it's going to end. And so people are trying to maneuver through all of that while they were stressed before. And I think, there was so much during those early pandemic months so this was before the summer of the social justice issues. So I think before that, right, there was so much going on there that like, kind of from a technical, like we got to get people set up so they can work from home. We've got to do this. We've got to figure out another way to serve people at our restaurant or groceries or, everybody's pivoting, right? That became the word, pivot. The ones who addressed the emotional needs did well. And the ones who didn't, I think that's what kind of started this great resignation. It's like people saw how they were being treated and it was like, why am I doing this?
Right.
Why am I jeopardizing getting sick, or why am I doing this for, $10 an hour, $12, whatever it is, depending on what part of the country or world, I guess you're in, but how they were treated. So if somebody was empathizing and saying, think about like in the office settings, maybe people can't log on and work from home now until 8:30 because of children issues, where before maybe they could arrive at the office at 8 or 8:30, whatever. The kid, was there flexibility? Did you even know what their issues were? And people want to know that you care about them. So, I mean, that's a lot of what I hear from the non-leader level.
Right. From
the leader level, they're oftentimes like, why can't people just come to work and do their jobs? People are more complicated than that.
Right. Exactly.
You can wish that all you want. It's not going to magically happen. Everybody's just going to come in, do their work, do it well, get along, never ask a question, never want to do a different job. It's just, that's not realistic. So getting to know people and knowing what their aspirations are, what their issues are, and then helping them achieve their dreams. And there's an old Zig Ziglar quote. I always loved this. If you help enough other people get what they want, they will help you get what you want. But it starts with you serving them.
Right.
What do you need? How can I help? What do you have going on? Basic questions, right? Just having one-on-one meetings with your people. And those are 3 super easy questions to start with. And how can I help you?
Yeah.
What do you need?
Yeah. And you don't hear that. So when you're talking to the leaders and you're telling them this, do they get it? Or are they just, kind of like, well, people are supposed to come here and do their job. How are they responding to what you're telling them you're finding out?
Yeah, some do. And here's why. There are a lot of wonderful case studies around this kind of work where you can talk about pre-intervention measures or metrics. And as a result of doing some of these things, which include building relationships, removing obstacles for people, helping them find opportunities that they are interested in and not just this job forever. When you do those things, you start creating a higher engaged workforce. And when your workforce is more engaged, your outcomes are better.
Yep.
Every time. No doubt about it. If you compare like within the same industry, different companies that have low employee engagement scores to high engagement scores, this one is always outperforming. The high one is always outperforming. So they do, many times they get it. I think, though, that part about building the relationships makes some people feel uncomfortable. Right. And it's like, I don't want to be, I'm going to be Brene Brown's biggest fan right now, but they don't want to be vulnerable.
Yeah.
They don't want to ask the questions and then listen to the answers. Listen to know that somebody has a boy and a girl. Or, it's one more thing to do. I've got all this work to do. There's always kind of a rationale that you can fall back on, and you can say, I've got these other 10 things to do. I just don't have time for that.
Yeah. You have to do it. And I want to ask you this quick question. I know, I don't know if this is a buzzword, but I've been hearing it a lot lately, is the conscious leader.
Mm-hmm.
Tell the listeners what that is and how that plays into everything you do.
Yeah. So, and I love that term, because I think it's tapping into the reality of what's going on, like what's really happening here. Because again, sometimes it's uncomfortable. And so like, we're going to look away, like I know those two employees sitting beside each other, barking at each other and don't like each other, but I'm just going to look away, but really tapping in. And in that kind of a scenario, like, what's going on, you guys? Let's talk about this. And maybe you can mend it or figure out another solution. But, if you ignore the realities that are going on, it's going to keep happening and things will never get better. And your results will never get better. And none of you will grow. You'll all be kind of stagnant down here. Just that definition of insanity, always doing what we've always done. And we're always getting what we always got. Yeah. So, let's, get vulnerable, lead consciously, ask some hard questions, dedicate the time to the people who are doing the work that you're leading and responsible for. I think that leaders forget that too. Like, you're responsible for this group of people. Yeah. You can't just wish it's going to be okay and look away and hope for the best. Like those are your team members. And I'm not sure. Have you ever heard of the company named Berry-Wehmiller?
No.
It's a global organization. I know they do some like manufacturing, but I also think they do some consulting work. But their leader, who actually just recently retired, his name was Bob Chapman. He wrote a book called Everybody Matters. And it's probably one of my top 3 favorite books. And I love it so much because he talks about, I feel like he's very genuine, but he talks about his leadership journey and how when he first started out as president of the company, he was numbers, expenses, revenue. He came up as an accountant. So he did what he knew. But over time and life experiences, things changed him. So he was growing, right? Personally and professionally. Then he came to that, consciousness. He was at a wedding and he was sitting in, I'm getting goosebumps talking about it, Trina. I love the story. He was sitting in the church pew. The father walked the bride down the aisle. The minister said, "Who gives this precious child to this man?" And the dad said, "Her mother and I." And he's sitting there, Bob Chapman, listening, and realizes like a light bulb went on. Every person is someone's precious child. Every person. And he's thinking to him, I'm not going to get the number right, so don't quote me, listeners. But he's thinking, I have 60,000 people's precious children in my care, in my stead, and I need to lead differently. Did. And it's a wonderful story. Like, if a company operated under this same thought process, we could probably reverse the 30% of engaged and get 70% engaged and only 30% disengaged.
Yes.
Because they really, really dedicate and measure employees' happiness and how they can help employees be happy outside the home. And so one of their metrics is they measure over time their divorce rate. Yeah. Fewer people were getting divorced. And one of the things he said is, if people are fulfilled at work, they go home to whoever they're going home to, even if it's themselves. They go home a happier person, and they treat everybody they encounter, whether it's the person that waited on them at the grocery store, a restaurant, the convenience store. They're happier and fulfilled. And that's what comes out when they engage with other people. So less road rage, less fighting at home, less children who are seeing parents like squabbling or whatever, they feel fulfilled. And he talks about all the different ways in which they get data points and success stories. And I love it. And honestly, I'm like, if everybody could just do this, it'd be great.
What's his name again?
His name is Bob Chapman,
Okay.
and the book is called Everybody Matters.
Wow. I got to get that.
It's amazing. And, if you Google him, there's some wonderful video of him, but also a great interview with him and Simon Sinek.
Oh, okay.
That's really, really good. Yeah.
Great. Yeah.
Favorites.
That's, that was a profound moment. Like you said, I have all these people's precious children under my care, and how can I help them, be happy? And that when you look at things from that perspective, it really changes your viewpoint, right? Everybody's not just a number. It's not just about making the widgets. It's something more than that.
Right. It's not just about the shareholder value or the second or third home.
Right.
Right. Those things could be important. I'm not going to take any of that away from anybody who's worked really hard to become a CEO or a C-suite person. But if you help enough other people get what they want, you'll always get what you want. So you can have both. Have happy employees, and your company can do really well. And then you do really well.
Yeah. And then it's amazing that you said they started looking at outside of work, things that, so that people could thrive and be happy outside of work. You don't find people that even care about employees outside of work.
Right. Wow. And there can be just really simple, unique things that can make just a huge difference in the whole place. But it does take work, and it's different work. It's not measuring expenses, right? It's looking the other way, kind of leaning into some of those harder conversations and saying, what do we need to do here? What could make this better? And I think too, kind of going back to, I was mentioning early pandemic, and then when we had last summer, when we had a lot of the social justice movements, you started hearing about companies, because again, stress before the pandemic, then this thing hits, and now it's like, what the heck?
Right.
And when's it going to end? And I hope my loved ones don't get sick. Okay. Right. So there's all this ambiguity and angst. And then this happens. And so there's sort of a rising up of people saying, now, what's going on now? Like, this can't be. So a lot of companies, and you maybe heard this in news and publications, started giving people like days off of, like, some called it rest or relaxation. Like there was a third R, reflection. Rest, relaxation, or reflection. I kept kind of hearing that.
Yeah.
That there was just so much, and people were tired and burnt out and sad. And, it's like, we need to take a step back, and we need to get better. So I loved some of those stories, and that's the kind of stuff that like I love to read. Lots of people like reading novels. Like, I love to read those kind of stories. Like, what did they do?
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
You've got to do something. And there were so many companies that did really good things to either help it during the pandemic or helped after social justice movements made changes in their organization, but really started kind of tapping into the hearts of their people.
Yeah.
And trying to make things different so that they're better.
Wow.
Yeah.
And I'm like you, I like hearing those stories too, because the companies that actually have made changes are the ones that you feel, okay, they do have a pulse. They do understand, they're paying attention, they're listening. Because you have so many who didn't, and they just thought, okay, we're going to go back to business as usual. Or they said, oh yeah, we hear, we see, but they did nothing.
Right. And, early pandemic too, I started kind of gathering a lot of like little stories of how, companies pivoted or whatever. And there, in my community, there's a local brewery that, everything was kind of shut down for a while. So they started making hand sanitizer and donating it. And a beauty shop, a large beauty shop chain here in town, they started like compiling all of their what could be used as PPE, but that's not what they called it before, and donating it. And there was a local, like a husband and wife, and she was like a scientist at Battelle. And he was an engineer. I forget what company he worked for, but they were sitting around one night at dinner, kind of talking about this whole, N95 masks, and there's a shortage, and what do we do? What do we do? And their employers came together because those two said, here's how we could wash the N95 masks. So remember when there was a shortage and they were hard to get, the N95s, because before they were kind of disposable. So they developed a way to wash them. And so companies could bring the N95s and go through like big machine, I'm going to call it.
Yeah.
And I saw it, locally, it was a big story because it happened here in my town. So the face masks were going through and they were, helping with that shortage. But, some companies were like, yeah, let's do this, and didn't go, oh, how's that going to impact our bottom line? It was just like, we got to all work together to get out of this mess. And then some CEOs who had retail or chain restaurants and, had to shut down. So their people weren't making tips, or even, if they were part-time, they didn't have benefits. And I'm sure even if they did, they'd run out of vacation.
Right.
They didn't take a salary.
Yeah.
So that they could take that money and redistribute it to keep people paid.
Yeah.
Like that's amazing.
Yeah.
And that feels like we're in it together, doesn't it?
Yeah.
It's not like, oh, sorry about your luck. I'm
right
over here. Yeah. I'm getting my check,
Right. Because, there are companies and people like that. They're like, oh, okay, sorry.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So, yeah. Oh my goodness. All right, Dana. See, like I said, I like this kind of stuff. So you and I could talk forever about this.
Me too.
So we got to get started on our questions. Are you ready?
I am.
Okay. Who or what motivates you?
So I'm going to call it good work motivates me. So I really enjoy my work. And when I have like a big project that I get super excited about, I am highly motivated to, just create the right type of outcomes and interventions. And sometimes it's training programs, and I do quite a bit of facilitating too. But kind of uncovering the issues and then find the right way to tell that story, because you don't want to call anybody's baby ugly, and you don't want to say, all the things you guys are doing are wrong, because it's never that. Sometimes it's one or two things that can really make a significant shift. So anyway, I get very, very excited on those kinds of things.
Yeah. What demotivates you?
I guess negative Nellies, like we can't do that. That's not going to work. That kind of thing. I feel like they drain my energy, and I have to figure out, okay, what can we do? How do you keep that coming back without losing some momentum or disengaging someone unintentionally?
When was a time that something was said or done to hurt you, but it worked for your good?
Okay. I'm going to share a time that I was receiving some feedback. And what was said to me. So I had applied for a position and I was not selected. And about, 6 or 8 months prior, I had applied for a position and was not selected. So the second time, then the person who was my boss at the time, he had printed off the feedback from the interview team about why I wasn't selected. And when I came in and sat down across the desk from him, he just put it on the desk and just pushed the piece of paper across his desk and said, "Always a bridesmaid, never a bride."
Oh.
And that just, it hurt. It really hurt. But why it made me better was I know that he didn't intend to hurt my feelings. He thought he was being funny. He didn't know how to give me the feedback. So I just, at the time, as I was sitting there, I was fuming. I was just like, what did you say? But I just listened and, took the paper with me and the next day I did go back in and talk to him. And I said, I want to share this with you. And I said, this is my perspective for what it's worth. And I said, as a woman, for you to say to me, always a bridesmaid, never a bride, probably hits me very differently than how you intended for it to as a man. And it doesn't feel good. And I don't think that's the way you should ever give anybody feedback. And while I was saying it, like I could even see his chin starting to quiver a little bit, like he was horrified that had happened. He didn't mean to really hurt my feelings. And I think it was also uncomfortable for him to hear me saying what I was saying, but he did listen and he apologized. So I felt like, that was like, it was hard feedback. I had to examine myself, but I also summoned up the courage to say to him what I did. And the whole exchange went well. So it was kind of like, you build on success. I think it was probably something that helped our relationship a little bit. We weren't like the best match anyway with our communication styles and our work approaches, but you make it work because you have to. You don't get to pick who your boss is, and in that case, he didn't get to pick me as an employee either. So you make it work. But I think that helped a little bit, just kind of getting over that hard thing and saying we're good now.
Wow, yeah, that's a good story. What is your fear?
If I'm honest, being irrelevant. I love to work and I love to learn. So if I ever got to a point where I couldn't add some value somewhere, like that would just be horrifying. I feel like for me, that will never be a problem because at a minimum, like when I'm 80 and I'm not done working, I can still go to Walmart and work. I'll find some way somewhere to contribute because I just think that's who I am. I can't imagine not working.
Yeah, I'm like that too. Is there a time when you wish you had done something that you didn't?
Probably, yeah. I'm trying to think. And I would say, maybe in some of my experiences with people where I could have been more honest about their performance, and probably kind of worked around it a little bit and shared some of the information that could have been more pointed, I think, and helped them kind of get to I was going to say scoot, but like get to the finish line a little easier than what they did. Yeah, that's a hard one, Trina. Gosh, that one made me sweaty.
Yeah. Ooh, well, get ready for this one.
Okay.
Is there a time that you wish you had not done something?
Yeah, I think sometimes, when, especially more so when I was like newer in leadership, and I would be talking about things I shouldn't have been talking about. I kind of didn't know it yet.
Okay. What is your definition of success?
A happy contributor. Okay. It's not necessarily about, accolades or money. I spent some time being so unhappy in my work that the times where I was really happy, I just noticed I feel more of who I am, and that's what I want. But I also want to be a contributor. I want to, help in whichever way I'm going to do it. So whether it's through facilitation or through discovery work or, helping people in the cashier line at Walmart one day, I just want to contribute.
How do you recharge?
Massive introvert. So I spend a lot of time like alone, and that's how I recharge. Yeah, it doesn't make me sad at all. That's how I recharge.
Yeah, it's funny because you're the second person I had like that, but I too am a massive introvert, and it's funny because you're this consultant coach. I'm a speaker coach. And yeah, I'm an introvert. I love being by myself. And I'm like you, I don't feel alone. That's where I draw my strength from. So it's funny how that happens.
Yes, it is. But you bring it out when you need it.
Right. Exactly.
When I need it, that I can store it out like a bear for midwinter,
Exactly.
Then I could go back out.
That's it. Yes. What are you awesome at?
Really awesome at. I think probably like the discovery conversations. I feel like I'm pretty intuitive. And when I first have an engagement with an organization or a leader, and I ask them what was happening, or what did you see, or what are you experiencing that you can tell me why you reached out to me. And it's usually like, well, we're seeing this or hearing that. It's usually not metrics, which I do ask for metrics, but it's usually not that. So anyway, if I can get some of that information and then ask to like attend a few meetings or talk to a couple of teams or a couple of other leaders and just start gathering things, you can start inferring. And especially in the days when we could go into the offices and look around, you can really kind of pick up on things.
Yeah.
Pretty easily. You have to tune into it and pay attention. But, I think that's probably what I would say I'm most awesome at.
What legacy do you want to leave?
A legacy of somebody who cared enough to help people in their workplace, just to be successful, to help them be successful. So I think about all of those people that wake up in the morning and hate their jobs. I really do. I think about it a lot. I don't want anybody to feel that way. I felt that way, and I saw how it impacted me and made me sad. And I want better for all of us.
Yeah. Wow. Dana, tell the listeners how they can connect with you, what you have going on. If they need to have you come into their business, give us the whole 9.
Okay. Well, thank you. So VogelmeierConsulting.com. So Vogelmeier, think of it, cut it right in half. Vogel, Vogel, Meyer, Meier. So VogelmeierConsulting.com. You can reach me through my website, or you can find me on LinkedIn and message me there too. And I just released, I haven't even done the marketing yet. So I just got my first book published, and it's on Amazon, and it's called The Workplace Atmosphere, Transforming the Dismal to the Desired. So it's really about how to take that workplace that's not good and things that you need to think about and look at and examine so that you can make some changes and make it a place where people desire to work.
Wow. I love that title, Transforming the Dismal to the Desired.
And I call it the atmosphere because I do feel like when you walk in, you can feel it.
Yeah, you can. You can.
So is it rainy or is the sun shining?
Wow. Oh my goodness. I wish I had known you had a book coming out, because we would have touched on that as well. But my goodness, we may have to have you back once it hits. And then let me know when it hits, and then I'll bring you back, because I definitely want to talk about the book. That is just so good. But Dana, thank you for taking time out of your day to be on Trina Talk. I enjoyed this conversation immensely.
Oh, me too, Trina. Thank you so much. I appreciate it.
I want to thank my guests for being on the show, and I want to thank you for listening. I hope you enjoyed the show, and don't forget to tune in next week.